happen on this bed. Do you like to sleep? I do too, but not on
Bakugo is the best character in My Hero Academia. There, I said it. What about All Might? He's alright. Todoroki? Not quite. Deku? Sure, yeah. If you ask me, Bakugo's already surpassed all of them. Okay, so I've been dying to finish this for a long time now. I've got some very hot takes. Real killer analysis. Alright, real talk though. This spiky-haired anime boy is on a beeline straight to the #1 spot in my heart. He's just so good, but I worry that a lot of people have trouble noticing exactly why he's so effective. There's actually a shocking number of people online who think he's poorly written. In fairness, I didn't fully figure him out until like my 5th watch through. But I'm the dumbest person alive, so... Look, I'm not a critic or a writer or even a half-competent audience half the time, but I think I've finally realized what makes our favorite blonde bombshell tick. Sorry if this is really obvious, by the way, I just want to think I'm cool and smart, unlike that one fucking guy on r/anime. That's right, this one's for you, fucker. But hey, I hear you saying, what's My Hero Academia? Hold on. What? Nobody's saying that? But no, it's already in the script though. I'm using it. So MHA is an anime adapted from a manga written by Kohei Horikoshi about a high school for superheroes. It's actually kinda like Sky High if it were good. No, the movies you loved as a kid don't hold up, and I won't apologize for that. But the really cool thing about My Hero that sets it apart from other superhero media is its ensemble cast. I mean, a lot of superhero shows have multiple lead characters, but few develop them so well. Out of the almost 20 students in Class 1A, I could, without much effort, describe about 15 and a half of their individual character arcs. Maybe at some point I will. That's not even all the characters in the show, but you can already see how much thought was put into the world and those living in it. They just mesh so perfectly. There's a character who's just really outgoing and seemingly decides to go into the hero biz because they like helping people out. One character comes from a family that's implied to be not very well off, and wants to go into hero work to make money so their family can have a better life. There's even one kid who legitimately wouldn't exist were it not for a forcible marriage meant to create the most powerful child possible. Remember this guy, he'll come up later. These are all really interesting ways to use characters to give an extra bit of definition to the world you're writing. And Bakugo's development is, in a way, a look into the writing process of the show. It lays bare some ways in which My Hero's world can be similar to our own, and how those similarities can lead to deeply flawed and interesting characters. But in order to understand Bakugo, it's going to be important to understand someone else first. Part 1. Deku exists. Kind of a low bar, don't you think? I believe there's a rule somewhere that says if you talk about My Hero Academia on the internet, you have to at least bring up the very good boy main character that is Izuku Midoriya, or Deku for short. I assume there's also a rule somewhere that states that the protagonist of a shonen anime has to be a very determined nice boy with no other discernible character motivation. There's no other explanation. I know that's a bit harsh, but I mean really, name one other thing that makes Deku unique. Regardless of my own personal gripes with his character depth, or lack thereof, he's the character the show mainly focuses on for the majority of its runtime. There's one-off episodes here and there that are about other characters, but at its core you have to understand Deku and his antics if you want to understand My Hero, and doubly so if you want to understand Bakugo. So I'll put my money where my mouth is and talk at length about this bright-faced Spike Spiegel knockoff. Maybe I'll stop being mean to him at some point. So, Deku grew up idolizing superheroes, hoping someday that he could be like them, and save people with a smile on his face, give people hope, all that. He didn't have a superpower yet. They're actually called quirks also, that's just kind of a thing in this show. A lot of the time, kids don't start to express their quirks until later in their childhood, so that's not a huge deal, probably. He waited for years, always convinced that he'd eventually develop a quirk. His mother had started to worry that he might not have a quirk after all, so she scheduled an appointment with this weird quirk doctor, who definitely isn't evil or anything, to get him examined. That day, he was crushed to find out that he would never develop a quirk. He was just a normal kid. So that's the show. Deku is a quirkless nobody, and then the show ends. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Okay, fine. There's more. He spends his time from this point on redoubling his efforts. He may not have a quirk, but he can still be a hero, right? He spends all his time studying pro heroes as much as he can, taking notes on their powers and fighting styles, the techniques they use to capture villains, and anything else he can think to look into, until one day he gets caught up in the action. He's the target of a villain attack, and who comes to save him but his favorite hero, All Might, who just kinda happens to be in town. All Might ends up losing track of the villain after saving Deku, but his powers have a strict time limit due to a previous injury, so he can't go in to save the next target, who is Bakugo, by the way, because, no, I'm really not sure. Bad luck, I guess. And somehow no one seems to be capable of fending off this weird sludge man. Deku runs in without thinking about the consequences to try and save his friend, which inspires All Might to push beyond his limit and beat the villain yet again. Inspired by Deku's bravery, he decides to pass on his power, a thing which is impossible for most people. But All Might's actual quirk is called One for All, and it allows him to pass quirks on to others. With that, Deku's character arc is basically finished. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still got a lot of powering up to do before his body can handle the immense power of his new quirk. But he's been studying how to be a hero for basically as long as he could read, and his actual character being as developed as it was is why he was gifted the power. Thus, most of his actual character development happens off-screen or in flashbacks before the story proper actually starts. That said, other characters are good enough to make up for this lack of real development, to a point where most of Deku's importance to the story is to encourage other characters to grow. Todoroki likely never would have gotten over his father abusing him. Just okay. Were it not for Deku. Ida may have fallen into a cycle of revenge or even fucking died were it not for our hero swooping in to save him from himself. Honestly, even Aoyama is driven by Midoriya's infectious determination. I had my doubts he'd ever be anything more than an eccentric French boy and, like, maybe a gay joke? Like, I still kinda can't tell. But thanks to Deku, he found his arc and grew because of it. That, I would contend, is Deku's true power. Or part of One for All or something. I'm not really saying this is part of his quirk, but like, maybe? No, that'd be stupid. To be as fair as possible, that's a fantastic way to write an ensemble show that primarily focuses on just one character. It just has the slight side effect of making that character incredibly bland for most of the show. That's really what I mean when I say I don't find Deku to be particularly compelling. Strictly speaking, as an individual character, he's just not that interesting. But when they got around to Bakugo, they discovered an incredible technique that industry professionals call writing a fucking character. And boy howdy, does that character have some issues. Part 2. Bakugo has anger problems. Now, it's kind of hard to notice, so I don't blame you if you missed it, but Bakugo is really angry, like a lot of times in the show. Okay, I know. Bakugo is very angry. That's the most overstated part of his entire character. I mean, it's not the only part, but we'll get to that. But yeah, he's not a perfect character. At the start of the story, he attends middle school with Deku, a nickname he came up with as a way of calling him useless. It's actually really clever if you have a deep understanding of the Japanese language, but I don't either, so this is just kind of a fun fact about the show. Anyway, Bakugo, being the middle school bully he is, tells him to jump off a building in hopes of being reincarnated into a body with a quirk. This, rightfully so, grinds some gears. But I think it's important to note that you'll never hear me call Bakugo a bad person. Okay, I should probably explain that one. One trap I've seen several people, including people whose job is to write about this show, fall into is that they think Bakugo is a bad person. On its face, this is understandable. Someone who acts like Bakugo does would definitely meet the qualifications, but I think that might give away what I'm hinting at here. I don't recall where I first heard this, but it's a good idea when consuming media to make a distinction between the fictional world of the text and the physical meat space it's read and produced in. That is to say, when you think about Bakugo like he's a real living human boy who did some really bad shit and is therefore bad, you are, intentionally or not, ignoring that this boy was written by a real person. The writer, in this case Kohei Horikoshi, may be trying to communicate themes important to the show, or any number of things. To put it another way, Bakugo doesn't exist, and if he's very obviously mean or bad or whatever else, your reading of him as such is probably intentional. Like, I have my hang-ups about Mineta, but at the end of the day, they don't stem from the fact that he's a pervert. Well, they do, but it's more than that. They stem from the fact that he's a pervert, and the writers seem to be kinda okay with that. Their treatment of him is what makes him a bad character in a way, because by treating him like they do, they're essentially communicating something about their own world. When Mineta gets handsy and the writing plays it off kinda like a joke, it can be read as indicative of how the audience should feel about these situations in real life. I mention this not because I want to call out Kohei Horikoshi, although I'm so glad he killed off Mineta, everyone's had quite enough. Even then, it's a very common archetype to fit a character into, especially in anime, and I don't want to be guilty of blaming the creator of one show for this without doing a whole lot more research than I already have. I say all this because Bakugo's mean streak is explicitly called out by the show. He's angry and abusive and a bad friend, but the show knows this. You're not smart for noticing he's a bad person, you're supposed to notice that. It's what they do with that information that matters, and in the end there's a few paths that lead Bakugo in a really satisfying direction. Before I get to all that though, I want to mention something I've noticed about quirks in this show. Just stick with me here. One really cool thing about the writing is that it uses quirks as a means of economic storytelling. Like, for example, Ochako, whose name is written with the kanji for tea-child, by the way. I just thought that was really pleasant. Her quirk is anti-gravity. As such, she's got a very floaty personality, and she's somewhat of an airhead at times, mostly at the beginning of the show. Yaoyorozu can turn lipids from digested food into objects, and this is directly comparable to her ability to take in information and quickly assess and come up with solutions to problems. Toru is invisible, and she honestly doesn't seem all that important to anything yet, but hey, at least they warned us. Bakugo's quirk, similarly, can be seen as indicative of a personality trait. He can produce explosions from his sweat, which is a pretty clear metaphor for his highly volatile personality and propensity for outbursts. Honestly, I don't even really think that counts as subtextual. It's not subtle at all, but I love it so much. It really helps you get familiar with the characters. So basically, Bakugo's a giant asshole, who doesn't really seem to care about others, and while in a weaker show I might criticize this, the fact that the show acknowledges it and uses it as a jumping off point for a character arc is actually really cool. He's deeply flawed and near irredeemable at the beginning, but just you wait. Horikoshi is using that to set up for several moments down the road that not only shift Bakugo away from being just straight up mean and heartless, but actually being pretty damn respectable. Obviously the power is there from the beginning, but there's so much more growth and learning he'll have to go through to get where he wants to be. That's one thing this show does brilliantly. It'll show you how low a character can get before inevitably letting them grow far past where you'd ever expect them to before. That's a big part of why I felt the Deku tangent necessary. Honestly, I just like to dunk on that nerd, and who doesn't? But honestly, there's more to it than that. These two both managed to inspire other students in their class. They say that in the show, I'm not just reading too much into it. I think there's something deeper to that though. It's pretty obvious why Midoriya would be able to inspire those around him, but why Bakugo? Isn't he the angry prick middle school bully man? Well, yeah, but actually no. I mean, he is pretty clearly that guy, but he's also so much more. I have a bit of a theory about the writing, actually. I think Bakugo's development is meant to mirror Midoriya's, right? So Deku kinda always had the smarts to be a hero, and he was naturally very brave and wanted to help others, but he didn't have the quirk to follow through on it. In a similar way, Kacchan has a really powerful quirk, and he's got the courage to match, but he doesn't often stop to consider others. They both have weaknesses, and their job is to grow and overcome those weaknesses to become better and achieve their shared goal. I just think emotional character growth is so much more than perfect boy becomes more powerful to beat bad guys. God, do I just hate shonen? But back to the topic at hand, Bakugo. Like, Bakugo is an angry boy, sure, but what's his deal really though? Part 3, what his deal really is. That's convenient. So I should come clean on one thing. This video essay took a long time to produce, mostly because of big writing problems. Kel surprise, I know. But to showcase just how much my take on Bakugo keeps evolving, this is about where my first draft of this video essay left off. He's angry, but he'll get better, I think. I had a couple other things to say, but all I had really was just a flimsy comparison between two characters. I still didn't feel I really understood why Bakugo was angry. Then, as I was almost ready to just give in and start recording an early version of everything I just said that was like twice as long and full of itself, I decided to go back and watch the show through again. I do this a lot, actually. The really nice thing about rewatching the show when you're a big dumb idiot like me is that you'll notice things that, in hindsight, were pretty obvious. And the even cooler thing is that sometimes what you notice entirely recontextualizes everything. And as luck would have it, this would be one of those rewatches. So as I sat in the dark, absent-mindedly fiddling with something and half paying attention to an episode, one of the characters said one word. And I realized why my first draft felt so empty. Bakugo's story isn't about a powerful angry boy becoming a powerful and less angry boy. Not really. It's about a boy who's been told his whole life he's destined for greatness. No, he's already great. He's been built up since a young age to believe that he's the strongest person in the world, and it's not until he arrives at Class 1A that he's challenged on that. You read the title. You started this essay with the thing that I was missing. Bakugo isn't just angry, he's prideful. And he lets that pride consume him, which is what goes on to birth the wrath we see in the rest of the show. I'm not even going to make the obvious Fullmetal Alchemist reference here. Whoa, I thought Pride was the kid. How did he give birth to his own dad? Wait, does that count? Fuck. This realization honestly broke me. I thought I understood Bakugo before, but I hadn't even attempted to get to the heart of why he works so well. After as much work as I had put into the scrapped version 1 copy of this essay, I felt I really owed it to myself to go through with this. But honestly, the use of a Pride archetype changes everything I used to know about Bakugo. When Deku beats him in the Heroes vs. Villains exercise at Ground Beta, it hurts on so many more levels because it's not just a realization that Deku can beat him, it's not even a realization that he's no longer the strongest person in the room. No, it's just dawned on Bakugo, whether he's technically right or not, that he's never been the most powerful person around. The sense of pride that is so core to his being up to this point was all based on a lie. In a very real sense, he was a product of what he sees as dishonesty, and from someone so close to him too. As a note, anytime Bakugo cries, it feels really poignant. Just about anything can bring Deku to tears, but for Bakugo to let down his powerful facade, it takes something nearly handcrafted to ruin him. Later on, he and Deku have to fight All Might as an exam of sorts, and given the option of running away, he refuses. He's up against the #1 pro-hero, and he's not about to back down, because doing so would be a tacit admission that this is an insurmountable goal. His pride is his downfall in a lot of ways, but I think this fight is a great example of both its advantages and its disadvantages. The one really cool side effect of this character trait is that he can't ever give up. Sure, this battle is going to be the toughest thing either him or Deku have ever faced, but he'll do anything to win. No cost is too high, because the price of running away is his self-respect. He can't justify feeling like he's the best if he faced the best and chickened out. I can't emphasize enough, this is some of the most well thought out writing I've ever seen. And that's not just me sucking the show's dick. Nearing the end of the 3rd season, Bakugo fails the Provisional Hero license test, and what follows has to be one of the most emotional showdowns in anime history. Deku. Kachan. Back at Ground Beta, where they fought at the start of the series, but now, Deku's earned his license, and Bakugo's the one left floundering. He's figured out Deku's secret, but his pride is broken. He's come from being the best around, and is now measurably and verifiably fallen behind the very person he's always considered weak. He's not just beating on Deku here, he's fighting to keep the sense of pride he's fostered all these years. And more so, he wants Deku to understand how much he feels he's failed. I suppose I should mention, this is writing on the tail end of an arc which concluded with All Might using up the very last of his quirk and retiring. The #1 hero almost died in a fight that wouldn't have even happened if Bakugo hadn't been kidnapped. It's understandable why he thinks it's his fault, and that's also certainly a catalyst for this fight. But I think what's far more important is that this is essentially pride versus pride. He takes full responsibility for every consequence of something he has relatively little control over. I mean, he was kidnapped instantly and without a fight by a team of villains who came specifically to kidnap him. But even so, when All Might retires as a result, it's a hit to his own self-worth. He couldn't really have done anything, but to him, there had to be some way to avoid this. And if he weren't such a failure, the world's greatest hero would still be a hero. But even in all this madness, there's one thing that really gets to the heart of why I think Bakugo is so fantastically well written. Those villains I mentioned, they're a part of a squad sent to capture Bakugo in particular, because their higher-ups think he'd make an excellent villain. But here's the thing, whether you realize it or not, there's been a slight shift happening this whole time. Of course he's not going to lie down and let the League of Villains have their way with him, and there's one key reason for that. Being as proud as he is, now means he's going to do something he can be proud of. He won't be a villain, because if he did, he couldn't face himself. The only decision he can make is to fight back. Actually, this whole pride archetype really reminds me of a different character from a completely unrelated show, and they have more in common than I first realized. That character's name is ZUKO. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a show you're probably very familiar with. Honestly, I love this show enough that I've watched it multiple times and try to sneak it into everything I do. But I have to say, it's kind of a perfect show for what I have to say a lot of the time. I mean, hell, I think there's more video essays out there talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender than, like, episodes of One Piece. Holy shit! Did they just forget to ever stop? Okay. So there are more video essays about The Last Airbender than episodes of Naruto? Yeah, I think that's a little bit more comfortable. Hey, I'll even throw Boruto in at this rate. Anyway, the show kind of has something to say about everything, and it's a shame that it ended after 3 seasons and never got any continuations, because those would almost have to be good, right? Jokes aside, if you haven't watched it, it should still be on Netflix whenever you're watching this. Please go check it out. I promise you won't be disappointed. Unless you decide to watch Legend of Korra afterwards. So whether you just binged the series, or remember the whole thing by heart like me, you'll probably see exactly why I compare ZUKO and Bakugo. Yeah, I know Todoroki has a shocking amount of surface-level similarities, from the scar burned onto the left side of his face as a result of child abuse-related trauma, to the fact that both of their fathers abused their power and even removed their mothers from the house as an attempt to maintain that power over the family. But you're just gonna have to trust me, Bakugo is similar in even more important ways, and I'll do my best to get across why I think that is. ZUKO is, in every way possible, the deuteragonist of this show. I've heard people assert that he's an antagonist turned supporting character or some nonsense like that, but it really doesn't have to be so complicated. Right, that probably doesn't seem less complicated if you don't know what a deuteragonist is. Basically, all it means is a character whose importance to the story is secondary to that of the main character and the antagonist, and they usually have a motivation that doesn't fully align with either, but that part's kind of flexible. I don't think I'd ever describe ZUKO as being an antagonist, despite his first impression, thus the fancy writing terms. Even in the first season, I'd say he fills his role as a dual protagonist very well. While it's true that he's often representative of the Fire Nation when it comes to Team Avatar, it's hard to ignore that as a character, he's incapable of really representing the Fire Lord's wishes, seeing as he was banished by his Father Lord years ago. The Fire Nation army is a much more proper antagonist, and who better to represent it, at least in Book 1, than Commander Zhao. ZUKO is seen being chased down by Zhao in much the same way that ZUKO himself chases the Avatar, which ends up meaning that Zhao serves as an antagonist to both Aang and ZUKO. This works well for ZUKO's character because his goal isn't really to capture the Avatar. I mean, he thinks it is, but we know that his real goal was to regain the honor he had lost at the hands of his father. The whole Avatar thing is just a means to an end. A very similar thing happens in My Hero. Even from the first scene, we know Bakugo is very antagonistic towards Deku, but it's not like that's his main goal. He wants to be an incredible hero and surpass All Might. His main goal isn't to, kill Deku or something. It's to serve his own pride, and at no point would turning against a fellow student be conducive to this goal. But it's not just that. ZUKO actually has a lot more in common with Bakugo than that, and that's the pride emblematic of both of their story progressions. See, the thing that really reminded me of ZUKO is the actual reason I consider him to be a deuteragonist. If he had stayed fully loyal to the Fire Lord until the end, he wouldn't have been nearly as memorable. Originally, he had set out to regain his honor, something he believed he could only do by capturing the Avatar. Along the way, he realized that the only way he could really redeem himself was to help the Avatar to end the war he had contributed to prolonging. This is how I think Bakugo's arc will continue. In order to earn the pride so core to his character, he has to become someone worthy of that pride. He has to become a hero in more than just title. Okay, I hear you saying, ZUKO is all great and whatever, but has Horikoshi even seen Avatar? How can you really say Bakugo will get this kind of redemption? And hey, fair shout. I don't actually know that Horikoshi has seen Avatar, although I do know he's seen Star Wars, so that's maybe something with Western media. And that Todoroki business kinda has to be a nod, right? I don't know. Maybe. Personally, I've never had a chance to ask him. But if you really need more, there is one character who embodies this perfectly, and I know Horikoshi's seen him because... Wait, really? Yes, I really do think that Endeavor is another analog of Bakugo. Is it intentional? Maybe. Does it really matter? But hear me out as I lead you through, I shit you not, a fourth character's entire arc in a video hypothetically about just one. The first thing most people know about Endeavor is that he's Todoroki's father, and the second is that he's unambiguously physically abusive towards his wife, and somewhat more ambiguously probably physically abused his son. He's not exactly winning any parenting awards, and it's honestly kind of shocking that this show is making me list child abuse as a stepping stone on the way to personal growth. Just to clear the record, child abuse is no good and very bad, and also incredibly fucking serious, and it should be noted that when I list it as part of a positive character arc, I do not mean to endorse it. Don't abuse your children, and if you're a victim of abuse, you are under no obligation to mend ties with your abuser. Claiming that is actually a classic abuse tactic, no matter what this show says. If you remember what I said near the start of this fever dream, here's where it comes back. Bakugo endorsed suicide as an option. Both actions, maybe even because they're so unambiguously bad, serve as the lowest point in their characters' arcs. The point at which their weaknesses led them so astray that they could only go up. Endeavor is the number 2 hero at the time of the show. Or, that is to say, he was. Well, he might as well still be, but we'll get to that. He graduated from UA a long time before the show starts, And even when he first entered the world of heroing, he set his sights high. He wanted to rise to the top, and to achieve this goal, he saw to it that he kept his undefeated record. He quickly rose to prominence and had a reputation of stopping more individual crimes than any other hero. He had almost gotten there, achieving the number 2 spot on the leaderboard at age 20. He's 46 now. So I wonder in 26 years that he never got burnt out? Insult to injury though, he only just got the number 1 spot a quarter century later because the last guy fucking retired. In that time, he could have, say, realized it wasn't going to happen, hunted down and married a woman by force, had a few children, stopping of course when he had the child he was looking for, one uniquely capable of wielding 2 quirks, in hopes that the child could carry on his legacy and eventually take the top spot on his behalf. I mean, hypothetically. Kinda sucks that All Might had to retire, honestly. I liked the plan with the kid so much better. Would have made for a kick-ass tournament arc, I bet. But the question remains, why do I think this guy has so much in common with Bakugo? Admittedly, it's mostly surface level with some light touches of speculation, but I think it holds fire? Oof, tough crowd. For a couple basic starts, they both have fire-related quirks, a temper, a tendency toward abuse, and they both have a very clear rivalry with the One-For-All user. If you ask me, that's all good and well for a start, but it doesn't really prove that they're both headed towards improvement. But keep in mind his original goal. He's been struggling for over half his life to become the world's best hero. A guy doesn't put that much effort towards a single goal without a motive. And I think, looking at everything else we've seen of him so far, I can confidently say he's a very prideful man. To give you an idea, just look at the guy. That's not facial hair. I was browsing the wiki a bit. It's actually a really risky move for someone who just watches the anime like me. And apparently, he wears fire on his face everywhere he goes just to like show people how powerful he is. I mean, come on. Case closed. That's honestly pretty incidental though. It's also worth noting the way he talks about All Might. He talks down to him, but it always feels implicitly meant to bring him down to his level. When he tells All Might in the Sports Festival arc that he's all flash and no brains, as always, I don't think he's being strictly factual. And they're not friends either. It seems to me like he's trying to break through that winning smile. It doesn't work, mind you, but it always kind of stuck with me in a weird way. Why is he this bitter at All Might? I mean, I can understand that this man has single-handedly kept him out of the number 1 spot for decades now. But I feel like even then you've got to respect someone so easily able to do that. But I think NG, that's his name by the way, actually makes it a lot clearer during All Might's climactic battle against All For One. At first it almost seems like he showed up just to shit on All Might again, but what's strange is that he immediately shifts to shouting out encouragement to his former rival. Yeah, All Might is the better hero, but now, in front of his very eyes, he sees the shriveled husk of a man that he's been unable to surpass all these years. If All Might really falls so easily, what does it say that Endeavor could never outdo him? This loss would be catastrophic, to be sure, but it would also injure his own ego. I honestly don't think that's reading too much into the situation. He's been the second best hero all this time, but he's never really been much into heroics. His eyes are set on beating his enemies more so than actually saving people, and this is all but said throughout the show. There's a reason he's fought and won against more villains than any other hero. That's what he was really aiming for. But that's not the most interesting thing about Endeavor. Perhaps the most out there thing about him is that after 26 years of pride, jealousy, and abuse, his arc still doesn't appear finished. In recent episodes it's become more apparent, but they've been hinting at redeeming him since the attack on Hosu. Todoroki left on his own to help Deku face a villain who was at the time unknown to himself and NG, only letting him know where he was going. The Nomu attacking the city were plenty more than enough to deal with, but his genuine worry for his son possessed him to send help that way instead of accepting it himself. But this has gone much farther in recent episodes. Following All Might's retirement, he swallows his pride, asking for guidance on how to become the symbol of peace that his rival once was. He's even been teaming up with the new number 2 hero, Hawks, and this all seems to be towards the end of turning Endeavor into a hero worthy of the respect he demands. I'd say it's worth a guess that if Horikoshi is willing to redeem a repeat domestic abuser, one line about jumping off a building isn't going to be enough to keep Bakugo from getting a redemption arc. But it really seems like growth is exactly what's coming for Bakugo. Which brings us to Part 6. Learning to be a hero. Bakugo's been edging on redemption for a while now, potentially as far back as his latest showdown with Deku in Season 3. That said, we haven't seen much of anything from him since, what with the arc where Deku fucks around and takes down a mob boss, and the absolutely far better School Festival arc. I know that's an incredibly unpopular opinion. I don't really think either is bad at all, I just find it incredibly brave to pull a complete 180 like that. And the way they still managed to make it work really shows off their writing chops. I felt it important to get that out of the way primarily because of what comes afterwards, Heroes Rising. I wasn't sure for the longest time if this thing was canon, but Google says it is, so fuck you. Honestly, it makes much more sense now that the entirety of Season 4 has been released, but when it came out right after the Overhaul arc, I didn't think it was nearly so clear. Despite that, I had really hoped it was in line with the story of the anime, because, if I'm not mistaken, this movie is all about Bakugo. I mean, it's kind of about all of Class 1A, and it's kind of about All for One's future plans, but from start to finish, it's hard not to see that thematically, this one's for him. There's even these two kids who take up a large portion of the plot, called Katsuma and Maharo, and I think these two are a metaphor for the two sides of Kacchan. I mean, Katsuma, Maharo, Katsuki, Bakugo, maybe. I'll admit that part might be kind of a reach, but there's more to it than just that. Maharo is a real brat, introduced by taunting Deku for taking too long to find her brother, because apparently a real hero could do it better. Right then, I guess I'll just leave you to it. Find your own brother next time. Aggression towards Deku aside, I think it's fitting to see Maharo as symbolic of Kacchan's pride. Her quirk allows her to create holograms of anything she can imagine. This brings to mind the way Kacchan is constantly putting up a front, trying to appear strong even when he's suffering on the inside. Katsuma, on the other hand, is a small, innocent boy with big dreams of becoming a hero one day. There's even a cute moment between Bakugo, Katsuma, and Deku. Well, between Katsuma and Deku, while Bakugo listens from a balcony. Close enough. Katsuma's talking about how he wants to become a hero and beat as many villains as possible, and Deku's response is kind of a perfect encapsulation of where he's at. He says he knows someone like that, but at the end of the day, he just wants to save people. If he has to beat a villain or two to get that done, so be it. It's a really honest scene, and Bakugo ends up so wrapped with eavesdropping that the popsicle he's holding melts. The whole thing just drops off the stick. That's gotta be the best use of a popsicle as a narrative device, like, maybe ever. I've seen this movie 5 times now, 4 times in the theater when it came out, and once in preparation for this, and every time, that scene just hits so hard. It's not especially poignant or anything, but it is unmistakably beautiful in a way that I've only ever seen My Hero Academia pull off. The parallel between Katsuma and Katsuki is made pretty clear here, but I think it could justifiably be seen to go even deeper. Katsuma has a quirk called Cell Activation, which allows a slight healing factor for himself and others at will. I found that to be fairly similar to the way he inspires those around him with his ambition. It could also be seen as symbolic of his own character improvement. As his pride is repeatedly struck down, he heals himself in a way by reminding himself why he keeps going. He wants to become a hero, and he'll stop at nothing to make sure he's the best he can be. I don't often get a sense that Bakugo is hurt and becomes more dickish as a result. It's almost always the case that he course corrects, however slightly, towards his goal of becoming a hero. Honestly, comparing these kids doesn't have to stop at Bakugo, and they could just as easily be symbolic for Bakugo, Deku, both, or even just heroism in general. This is just the reading I've always latched on to the most. Was this the intended meaning of the kids? I don't actually know. I don't really care, to be frank. Whether meaning was written into these characters or not, it can still be supported by the text, and it's cool as hell that a movie made for such a popular show is not only canonical, but so well written as to raise these sorts of questions. The core fascination of this movie on Bakugo is more than just thematic, though. He's also a very key character in his own right. He exhibits a fair bit of character growth once villains arrive at the island. During his fight against Mummy, he willingly sacrifices one of his gauntlets to free himself and prevent his opponent from causing damage to the town and his friends. But far more important than that is what comes at the end of the film. 9, so named because he has access to 9 different quirks at once, has so far stormed the fortress the citizens and Class 1A take refuge on, and even though the rest of the crew is doing an excellent job depleting his energy, they're not able to fully subdue him. Bakugo and Deku have to come in to get the job done. And just by how this fight is choreographed, you can tell these two have gotten a lot more comfortable around each other, even if Bakugo wouldn't want to admit it. There's a moment in this fight, after everyone's done all they can to take down 9. It really does seem like all is lost. Most of the heroes are incapacitated, save for 3 who are doing all they can just to prevent a cave-in and tend to the citizens, and of course, Deku and Bakugo. They don't know backup is coming, but even if they did, it couldn't possibly come soon enough. 9 is holding their 2 limp, injured bodies, and it looks like there's no way out. But Deku has an idea. He can pass on his quirk to Kacchan, and even though he may lose it in the long run, it's all worth it if they can just save these 2 kids. The expressiveness in Bakugo's face here is perfect, so many thoughts rushing through his head, but this is their only option. He has to take it. But after all is said and done, the raw strength of 2 One-For-All users is just barely enough to win the fight and save the island. One-For-All returns to Deku for some reason, leaving Bakugo with no memory of how he broke his arms in the fight. And one stray thought pops into my mind. How does he think he broke his arms? Every time in the entire show, arms are shown to be this badly injured, it's One-For-All. No, like every time. You know, like, this time, and that time too. Like, all the times. You know, like, all of them. Like, every one. This bit's probably gone on long enough. I like to think he secretly passed One for All back to Deku, and he's pretending not to remember. I couldn't really justify it if I was pressed, but that's satisfying for me. But the really cool bit about this movie isn't the choreography or the animation or anything like that. I mean, it is. Those things are both extremely on point. But the thing that sticks with me, and the reason I can't stop thinking about Bakugo, the reason I wrote this whole video essay, is because of what happened at almost the very end of the movie. There's a lot of moments like this, but this one in particular really stuck with me. After all the villains have been dealt with, the rescue effort completed, and the town is being rebuilt, the students are all setting course back to Yuurei, leaving behind the island they had spent so long on. Everything's all bittersweet about leaving, but it's what they have to do, when all of a sudden, the two kids they saved chase the boat as it drifts away, saying their tearful goodbyes, and Bakugo, cool as he always is, can't help but smile back. Part 7. Where do we go from here? I've thought a lot about Bakugo through this whole process. No, really, it's been like months for me. You get to skip past most of that just watching this. But really, what's going to happen with Bakugo? Is his journey over? Is his character arc finished? Are he and Deku finally gonna smooch? No, probably not, and hopefully. Most importantly, I think he's only just started on this quest of self-realization. I think in the moment when the boat was leaving the shore, he figured something out about himself. Everything's better when you let other people in, even just a little bit. And maybe, next time Deku does some damn nerd thing, he'll learn to be a little less angry. But hey, I don't know. I haven't even read the manga. To be honest, I couldn't be bothered to up to this point. What would I know? There's a fresh new season right around the corner. Should be coming out like right after this video essay, hopefully. So I guess I'll just have to wait on this one. Above all else, I'm excited to see what this show has in store for us. If you liked this long, winding diatribe about a show I love, consider dropping a like, maybe even subscribe if you really want to. If you hated it, subscribe too, I guess. That's legally binding. You have to now. Got 'em. I'll probably be doing more stuff like this soon, and hopefully it won't take quite so long next time. I also stream over on Twitch if you want to follow me over there. Who knows, maybe something we talk about could end up being my next 20-page garbage heap. But with that, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. Probably watch something else for a bit. Maybe Attack on Titan? Yeah, I'll try to have a video essay about that one done in like 2024. I feel like that's realistic. So keep an eye out, I guess. If you're still here, thanks so much for making it to the end of this monstrosity. It really means the world to me that anyone would listen to what I have to say for that long. And until next time, have a good one. You burned out.